Hello and welcome to the program. My special guest today is Robert Alvarez, a senior scholar at the Institute for Policy Studies, where he's currently focused on nuclear disarmament, environmental and energy policies. Between 1993 and 1999, Mr. Alvarez served as a senior policy advisor to the Secretary and Deputy Assistant Secretary for National Security and the Environment. While at the Department of Energy, he coordinated the effort to enact nuclear worker compensation legislation. He coordinated nuclear materials strategic planning for the department and established the department's first asset management program. Bob was awarded 2 secretarial gold medals, the highest awards given by the department. Bob Alvarez is an award-winning author and has published articles in prominent publications such as Science Magazine, the Bulletin of Atomic Scientists, Technology Review, and the Washington Post. He joins me now from America. Welcome to If You Love This Planet, Bob.
Good morning.
Good morning. Good afternoon to you. We're taping
That's right.
in Australia and you're in Washington, D.C. Now,
That's right.
The reason I wanted to specifically interview you now is to go through in a logical sequence and explain to the public your paper on spent fuel storage. And we'll have to start right from the beginning. What is spent fuel?
Spent fuel are the rods that are used in nuclear power plants to generate heat, and the heat is generated by splitting the atoms of uranium-235, which is in a mixture with uranium-238 in a percentage of around 3, 4, maybe 5% these days. And after a period of year and a half or so, the fuel builds up radioactivity, and the ability of the atoms of uranium-235 to split diminishes, and the fuel is spent. The uranium-235 is spent, and in the course of doing that, it has generated a fantastic amount of radiation. These fuel rods are about, I would say roughly 6 to maybe 7, 8 feet long. They're about as thick as perhaps your thumb, and they are encased in a metal tube cladding that's made of an alloy of zirconium and stainless steel. These rods are then placed into bundles, and the bundles tend to be in bunches of, let's say, 80 to 100. And when the fuel is used up, they pull these bundles out, and they place them in pools of water that are located near the reactor, where they're supposed to be cooled off. And the original intention was for the spent fuel to be put into these pools, and after 5 years, when some of the more radioactive elements would have decayed and it becomes less hot both radioactively and thermally, the spent fuel was to be moved elsewhere. But that has not been the case in the United States. These spent fuel rods, typical spent fuel pool, constitute some of the largest concentrations of radioactivity in the planet. Some reactors in the United States have been operating for several decades, and have 2 or 3 reactors at a site that have been operating for 30 or 40 years, and these reactors have generated literally several hundred millions of curies of radioactivity. There aren't any concentrations like that exist other than at long operating nuclear power plants.
Yeah, I've read that in America, where, as you've just pointed out, the reactors have been going some for 40 years, that in some of the spent fuel pools, there's 2 to 30 times more radiation in the spent fuel pools than there is in the reactor itself. Would that be accurate?
That's correct. And it has a much more long-lived radioactivity than would be in a reactor. You would typically a spent fuel pool would have roughly 5, 6, 7 times more long-lived radioactivity, most notably cesium-137 than you would have in a reactor.
Yeah. So just to give a background, when you put 100 tons or so of uranium in a reactor core, which is usually about the amount they use, the uranium, when it fissions, becomes 1 billion times more radioactive. 1 billion times more radioactive. And the core itself contains as much long-lived radiation as that released by the explosion of 1,000 Hiroshima-sized bombs. So it's very, very radioactive. Describe just one spent fuel rod, which is about half an inch wide and, 6 to 12 feet long, Bob. If you stand next to it, what would happen to you as a human being?
Well, if you were to stand next to it for any period of time, a minute or so, you would die from acute radiation syndrome.
Well, how much time would you need to stand next to it for before you got that?
Minutes.
Minutes.
If that.
So much gamma radiation, like X-rays.
Yeah, if you would take a bundle of rods, for example, and put them outside, which is really inconceivable, but and you were to ride on a motorcycle and drive within 1 foot of those rods at 60 miles per hour, the time that you would spend passing by at 1 foot at 60 miles an hour would be enough to kill you outright immediately.
What, you just dropped dead off the motorbike?
Yep.
Oh my God, I didn't know that.
That's how fantastically radioactive this material is.
That would make a good film. Someone should make a film about all of this.
Well.
Do you know anyone in Hollywood?
Yes, with special effects, the studios.
This is realistic.
This stuff is phenomenally radioactive,
Oh.
and it has to be. And so it has. This is why it has to be kept in heavily shielded environments, and they're stored in the United States. Most of the spent fuel, about 75% of it that's been generated over these decades, are stored in these pools that are holding about 4 to 5 times more spent fuel than their original designs intended. These pools were never intended to be indefinite storage facilities for this ever-accumulating amount of radioactive material.
And where are the pools located in regards to the reactor itself?
Well, for the reactors that are similar to that of the Fukushima reactors, which experienced this terrible disaster, they are General Electric boiling water Mark I reactors. The General Electric boiling water Mark I and Mark II reactors have pools that are next to the reactors and are about 100 feet off the ground.
They're next to them. I thought they were on top of them, on top of the building that.
No, they're off. They're off to the side.
Oh, to the side, in a separate building.
No, they're basically in the same reactor building.
Yeah.
But in order to refuel a boiling water reactor, you sort of have to pop off the top, pull the fuel out, and shift it over by an overhead crane into the nearby pool.
Yeah, so they're sort of on the roof. What about other pools? Are some of them on the ground?
Well, the pressurized water reactors are located nearby the reactors, but they tend to be either on grade or slightly below grade, but they have cavities beneath them, large spaces beneath them, which is problematic. The reason I'm mentioning the problem of the height of the pools and the issue of the cavities is that it is the concern of what might happen if water were to drain. And
well, first of all, explain why water is necessary.
Water is necessary to provide both cooling and shielding.
So these spent fuel pools need to be continually cooled, as does the reactor core itself, right? With
That's
water.
right. They have to have water circulating through them on a constant basis.
Yeah.
They don't get as hot as fast as the material inside of a reactor does, but over time, if you lose the coolant, some very, very bad things can happen. In 2003, my colleagues and I wrote a paper because of our concern over the 9/11 attacks, and we looked at what might happen if terrorists were to use the nuclear power plant as a target, and what would be the most vulnerable aspect of the reactor. And we decided it was the spent fuel pools, because the pools, unlike the reactors themselves, are not under any heavy, thick-walled, concrete containment. They tend to be housed in what they call the reactor building, and are housed in structures that you would find at auto dealerships or big box stores. So, and then the pools that are high up above ground, if you think about it, if something were to cause a crack in the pool, and the water would drain all that much faster.
Do you think terrorists are aware of the vulnerability of these pools, Bob Alvarez?
I think so. I mean, I think that there's enough information out in the public record that this is not some big secret I'm giving away.
And isn't it true that the terrorists who flew into the World Trade Towers had in fact targeted the two Indian Point nuclear power plants 35 miles from Manhattan? Is that so?
They had certainly considered doing that, and but chose not to.
And do those reactors have cooling pools on the roof of the building?
Elevated? No, they don't. They don't have elevated pools. But what we pointed out was that if something or somebody, because one of the worst possible things could happen to a reactor is, for example, an earthquake.
Yeah.
Because it causes, essentially destruction of lots of things that are necessary to keep the reactor in a safe mode. And so if someone were to crash a plane or an earthquake were to occur and cause the water to drain from the pool, what would happen is that over time, by the time the water, these pools are 40 to 50 feet deep. The walls are fairly thick, but they can be penetrated by anti-tank weapons, aircraft, and things like that, or earthquakes can cause them to crack.
Mm.
When the water drains, by the time the water reaches approximately, let's say, 1 meter above the top of the spent fuel, the radiation doses coming off of the spent fuel assemblies would be life-threatening to people at the site.
Isn't that what happened in Fukushima?
Well, that's certainly what happened at Fukushima.
In four fuel pools?
Well, they had pools where they are obviously, the dose rates that were coming off of the pools were so great that they couldn't go near these buildings and had to use remote water cannons and helicopters and the like to try to dump water in them to keep them from...
And isn't that still the case? They haven't really fixed the fuel pools and they're still emanating.
Well, what they have done is they've been able to establish a little more stable supply of water, but it's not a closed system. It's still an ad hoc system and subject to lots of leaks. And the things such as the pools themselves, you have to be concerned about their integrity after the earthquake and the tsunami, and whether or not they have cracks in them or any other disturbances can cause them to leak further.
Mm.
So as the water drains, and by the time the water is drained enough that the fuel itself is exposed to open air, it varies in time, but it could be a matter of hours